The lighthouse stood on a jagged rock, far from the coast. It had been there for 137 years, a lonely sentinel against the endless, churning sea. The lamp had been dark for 10 years, since the last keeper disappeared. They found the door locked from the inside, the logbook filled with scribbles and drawings that made no sense. Local tales whispered of a curse, a gateway in the sea, a place where the veil between worlds thinned. I did not believe in curses, not then. My name is Sarah, and I am a researcher. I came to find the truth, or what remained of it. I arrived on a Thursday, the 21st of August. The air was heavy and salty, thick with the smell of seaweed and something else, something old, metallic, and vaguely unsettling. It made my stomach churn. The sky was a dull, featureless gray. The boat that brought me left as soon as I stepped onto the rock, the small motor fading quickly into the roar of the waves, leaving me utterly alone. The lighthouse was taller, more imposing than it had appeared from the shore, its white paint peeling like sunburnt skin, the metal rusting like dried blood. The door was heavy, colder than the sea air when I touched it, and it opened with a low groan, a sound like a sigh of anticipation. I stepped inside, my heart pounding against my ribs. The entrance was dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of mildew and brine, and the metallic tang was stronger here, coating the back of my throat. The walls were cold, rough stone. A winding staircase spiraled up into the darkness, a black vortex pulling my gaze upward. I pulled out my flashlight, the beam cutting through the shadows, but they seemed to swallow the light, leaving the corners of the room in an inky blackness. I started to climb, each step creaking like an old bone. The steps were narrow, uneven, and felt slick beneath my boots. The higher I climbed, the colder it became, a cold that seemed to seep into my bones. I could hear the wind howling outside, a mournful sound that was almost a scream, and something else, a soft, rhythmic breathing, getting louder with each turn. I stopped to listen, but the breathing stopped. I kept climbing, my breath catching in my throat. I reached the first landing. It was a small, circular room, the stone walls sweating with damp. A table stood in the center, coated in a layer of dust that shifted as I moved, like a disturbed shroud. On the table was a logbook, its pages yellowed and brittle, and a small metal key, cold and slick as polished bone. I picked up the logbook. The entries were written in a shaky hand, a hand that seemed to grow more frantic and disturbed with each passing date. The first entry was from a Monday, the 6th of January, 10 years ago. It was normal, almost mundane. Simple words about the weather, the endless sea. The following entries grew stranger. The keeper wrote of the light, how it seemed to shift and change, how it felt like it was watching him. He wrote about the sea, how it was not just water, but a living thing. He wrote about the sound, the breathing, that echoed in the tower every night, louder and louder. I think the lighthouse is alive, he wrote, the words almost illegible, like they were scratched out in panic. The last entry on that page was a single word, waiting. I turned the page. The next entry was dated Friday, the 10th of February, but the writing was different, not the keeper's hand. It was angular and sharp. It is coming. We are waiting for the one. The pages that followed were filled with drawings, not like normal drawings, but strange, disturbing shapes, circles that seemed to turn into eyes, lines that twisted and shifted into patterns that made my head throb. And the number 1 was hidden in each of the drawings, if I looked closely enough. I put the logbook down, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the cold stone. I was not alone, I was sure of it. But who, or what, was with me? I picked up the key. It was cold and smooth, and it left a strange metallic taste on my fingers. I turned back to the staircase and climbed, the breathing louder now, the air thick and heavy. The second landing was the same as the first, another circular room. This one had no table, only a single window. I looked out, and I could not see the shore. Only endless sea, a canvas of shifting colors that swirled with greens and blues, then turned a deep, unnatural purple, and then back again. The wind was howling outside, a high-pitched scream, but inside, the air was so still it felt suffocating. I looked at the window again, and in the reflection, I saw not my own face, but the keeper's, his eyes hollow pits of black, staring back at me. And when he smiled, his teeth were sharp and too many. I stumbled back, my heart pounding, my breath catching in my throat. I rubbed my eyes, and the reflection was gone. It was just me, my own face pale and drawn. I told myself it was the flickering light, the strange angle. I turned away from the window, but the image lingered, burnt into my vision. I turned back to the staircase and kept climbing, the breathing following me, like a shadow. The next landing was different. The room was not circular. It was long and narrow like a corridor. The walls were covered in mirrors, each one reflecting a distorted version of the same corridor, stretching into infinity. I walked forward, and I saw myself moving towards me, moving away from me, the same me over and over again, each one smiling with the same sharp, unsettling grin. It felt like the corridor was growing, stretching and shifting in impossible ways. The rhythmic breathing was louder now, wet and heavy, right behind me. I stopped in front of one mirror. My reflection was not moving. It was still staring. It was smiling, that same disturbing smile. And the eyes, they weren't mine. They were hollow and dark like the keeper's. I reached out to touch the glass, and my hand went through, like the mirror was no longer a solid object. I stepped through, feeling a strange pull. I found myself in a new place, no longer in the lighthouse, but on a beach. The sand was black, cold and wet, sticking to my boots like tar. The water was dark and still, like oil, reflecting nothing. There was no sun, no sky, only an endless gray haze that seemed to press down on me. The metallic smell was overwhelming now, making my eyes water. I turned back, and the lighthouse was gone, as if it had never been there. I was alone. I started to walk along the beach, the sand squelching under my boots, the air cold and damp. I walked for what felt like hours, and I found a path, leading into the darkness, made of rough stones like the steps in the tower, and it was winding. I started to walk down the path, the breathing growing closer, the sound of wet, dragging footsteps right behind me. The air grew colder, and I felt a touch, wet and cold, on my bare arm. I brushed it away, but I could still feel it there, a phantom sensation. I tried to run, but my legs felt heavy, like I was wading through deep water. The path was endless, and the darkness was closing in. The path led to a door, an old wooden door with a rusty lock. The door was made of dark wood, swollen and warped, and it pulsed ever so slightly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key. To fit, I unlocked the door, the lock clicking with a sound like bones breaking. The door creaked open, inviting me in, like a mouth opening wide. I stepped into another room. The room was small and circular like the rooms in the lighthouse, but this one was different. The walls were not stone, but flesh, pulsating and slick, with veins visible just beneath the surface. The rhythmic breathing was coming from the walls, and from the light in the center of the room, a strange, glowing orb that pulsed in time with the walls and in time with the breathing. I looked closer. The orb was not light. It was an eye, large and unblinking, watching me with cold, calculating intent. I could see faces reflected in the pupil of the eye, faces that shifted and changed. My own face, the keeper's, and countless others, all caught in the same gaze, all drawn in. It was as if time and space were meaningless here. Everything was connected and everything was the same. I felt a pull, a force drawing me towards it, a desire to merge. I tried to fight it, but I could not. I felt like I was no longer in control. My legs started to move, my feet dragging me forward. The eye grew larger and I felt myself drawn inside. The breathing surrounded me, a deep, wet sigh, and then the single word, one, repeated again and again. The last thing I saw was my own face in the eye, the smile unnaturally wide, and the eyes hollow and black, like the keeper's. The last thing I heard was the rhythmic breathing, the single word, and the sound of the sea. The story ends here, or perhaps it never began. It is up to you to decide what it means. What happened to Sarah? Was she the one? What is the meaning of 1? The lighthouse is still on the rock, and the sea is still waiting. Perhaps it has already found you.